Hi guys, and welcome to another video. In this video I want to show you a position again regarding the topic material versus initiative. So in this position white is a pawn down, and my question to you is white having enough compensation for the pawn? Is white not having enough compensation for the pawn? Or is white even having more than enough compensation for the pawn? And my question to you is, first, how would you evaluate the situation? And second, how would you play? Take your time and we will discuss this now. So let's see. It's white to move, and the minimum we should get, and I think this is something you really should check at first, is how are all the captures. For example, we could capture everything and then capture d7, and we immediately see white cannot be worse here because white is more active. After this trade we would enter on the 7th rank and we regain the pawn. So my conclusion after this would be that white can never be worse, so it must be at least equal. So having found this, we can look for more. And there are some interesting ways we could think about. If you thought about winning the pawn here, you must be careful because black has some counter checks, and this would actually lose the game for white because he blunders the bishop. So be careful about this. This is of course a pawn we would love to take more than the d7, but it doesn't work tactically. So what else? In general, one might think that it's also an option to keep the queens on, which is quite reasonable because then our initiative against the black king might be bigger than if we just trade the queens, and I think it's quite reasonable, but we still need to do it with care because here we would again blunder the bishop. So we need to find some other square for the queen, but maybe it's just too tough to avoid the trade of queens. Maybe he can try to force it. And again, we cannot take c7, and of course something like this might also be playable, and we might get this d7 pawn, but there might be also some counterplay. So at the first sight, it does not seem so easy for me to prevent the queen trade and at the same time keeping up the initiative. And we see in many lines that this bishop is a problem. So what I would consider is doing something with the bishop and maybe thinking about bishop d3. And I think this might be a bit paradoxical to some of you because just retreating, allowing black to trade the queens, and usually without the queens the initiative tends to be over more quickly. But in this situation it's a bit different. So first note, if black keeps the queens on, then white as a minimum just has bishop d2, picking up the c7 pawn later, which should be at least better for for white. Maybe there is even more, but it's not so important for now. Maybe after queen h5 we have something more threatening, but at the very least we can take the pawn safely, and with the pair of bishops we have better development. It must be really, really good. So the real thing, which might be a bit hard to evaluate from the beginning, is the queen trade. And we of course take with the h-pawn. And now there are so many threats, and this is the key moment, I think, of this example, that we, even if the queens are exchanged, we can keep so much initiative that being a pawn down doesn't really matter. We have several threats. We threaten, for example, take on f6 followed by rook to h7, and then we would continue the attack with rook d to h1 and attacking along the h file. So white is having huge compensation, and we can see, can black actually defend against this? And sadly for him the answer is no. So it's not possible to go g6 because the knight would drop on f6, and also h6 doesn't help because we just take on f6 and then h6 drops. And white is not only having compensation, this position is actually winning for white because The initiative is still going on after regaining the material. So, for example, let's say black is desperately trying to um, yeah, develop with d5. We might just take here and then take here. I would say with the rook. It's really not over by winning just one pawn. We might win another pawn, we might checkmate, and it's really serious. And this is something which is the case quite often when you have compensation and your opponent needs to give back some material and he does it too late. The initiative is still ongoing and you still keep a positional advantage on top while you have regained the material. So I hope this was instructive for you, and if you like the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel would help me a lot, and see you next time. Goodbye.